Hey everyone, this is 8-Bit Flashback, and I just got my latest builds done, the PC Engine and the PC Engine Classic Edition. Let's check these out. So these are both 3D printed cases, and the larger case is the actual size of the original PC Engine, and the smaller case is exactly half the size of the original console. The PC Engine at the time was one of the smallest consoles ever made, and it only measured 5.5 inches by 5.5 inches. And if you're looking to print one of these yourself, this is available at thingiverse.com by a designer named Slivas 2001. And this is just an empty case with no portholes or nothing on it, so if you want to use this for a Pi 3, there is a lot of extra work involved to make that work. But Slivas did a great job designing this case, and there's a lot of realistic detail on it. For those of you not familiar with the PC Engine, it was released October 30th, 1987 in Japan, and it was meant to be a direct competitor with the Famicom. And it was actually the first 16-bit console to be released, although it only had an 8-bit CPU, but it did have a 16-bit video color encoder and a 16-bit video display controller. The PC Engine actually did very well in Japan and outsold the Famicom in 1987. So the PC Engine is a huge part of gaming history, and I had a lot of fun building these consoles. So inside my mini Classic Edition version, it has a Raspberry Pi Zero inside of it, along with a modified SD card reader. It also has a functional power button with a safe shutdown script installed. And as you can see, the original console is already really small to start with, so making the Classic Edition was kind of a challenge because this is only about 2 3/4 by 2 3/4 inches, so this thing is really tiny. And if you've watched some of my other videos, then you know I really get a kick out of these miniature consoles. And I'm definitely addicted. And here's a look at the full-size console, and there's quite a bit more going on with this one. Of course, I have the functional power button with the safe shutdown script installed. And with both consoles, I just made that power button a push button just to make the design just a little bit easier. And on the front here, I added a USB port. I kind of wanted to keep it true to the original design and only have one controller port, just like the original. And on the back here, I have my portholes cut out for the power input, the HDMI output, and the AV out. And of course, I can't have my miniature consoles without my miniature games. So for the mini Classic Edition version, I have some SD cards with an image preloaded on them. So when I power up the console, it loads a preview of this game. So it fits in that card slot a lot like the original console. And for the full-size console, I 3D printed out some hue cards and printed out some game labels. And these are the actual size of the original hue cards. And on the back of each of these cards is an NFC tag along with an NFC reader that's inside the console, so when I power up the console, it loads these specific games. So this is actually a full functioning console. I got games that load a lot like the original. I've got that one controller port in the front, I've got that power button, and the emulation for the PC Engine on the Pi 3 running Retropie is very good in my opinion. And I'm not going to go as far as to say this is better than the original system because I'm a huge fan of retro gaming and I love the original stuff. So I think of these consoles more like a tribute to the originals. And just like the originals, if you want to play more than one player, you got to use a multi-tap or a turbo tap is what we call it here in the US. And for this smaller console here, it plugs in on the back and that allows me 4-player support. And if you remember the original consoles, if you want to play more than one player, you had to buy that multi-tap or the turbo tap. And for the full-size console, I've got my USB hub man for the multi-tap. He kind of looks funny, but he does match the console pretty good because he's red and white. So when I want to play a 4-player game, I'm going to be ready to go. Even though I don't think I have 4 friends locally here that like to play retro games, so I guess I'm on my own. And here's a size comparison with some of my other miniature consoles. Here's the TurboGrafx-16 Classic Edition, and it's exactly half the size of the original. Here's my highly modded Android Nintendo Classic Edition, and notice it's really close to the same size as the original PC Engine. And this is also half the size of the original console. And here's my Sega Genesis Classic Edition, and this was made using a Sega Genesis USB hub. And I will be doing a mini cartridge mod for this here in the near future. And here's a look at my Super Nintendo Classic Edition that's been modded to use NFC games. So all these miniature consoles are on scale with each other, which is about half size. And here's a quick look at how I built the PC engines. It all starts with a 3D printer, and I'm using a DaVinci 1.0. And here's how it looks after it's done being printed. And it resembles the PC Engine, but it takes a lot of extra work to actually make it look nice. So I have to start with cutting all the portholes, then get my electronics fitted inside. Then I have to remove all the electronics so I can start prepping it for filler primer. And the filler primer is a very thick primer that's sandable that allows you to fill all those imperfections, then sand it so you can get a smooth finish. And I usually use a couple coats of filler primer, and I'll start with a 120 grit sandpaper and then end with about a 600 grit sandpaper. After I'm done priming, it's time for a base coat, and for my color, I'm using linen white. And when I'm doing base coat, I use a minimum of 2 coats, but a lot of times I gotta put about 3 coats of paint on. And this is the step where that console really starts to come alive. When you start getting that color on there, it makes a huge difference. And here's a look at it after that base coat's done being applied, and I'm pretty close to being done, but I got a few more steps still. Now it's time for some clear coat, that way I can protect that white finish. And I like to use a matte finish because that kind of gives it more of a plastic looking finish. Now it's time to put all the electronics back inside the case, and for that NFC electronic kit, I'm using the Megabit NFC kit, which is available at megabitnes.com, but I did have to modify the power and reset buttons for this to work. Now it's time for some decals, and for those decals I just use clear shipping labels, and I think it works really well. After that, it's time for some detail painting where I paint that controller port and the power button. And here's a look at the end product, and this ends up being about a week-long process between printing it out and painting it and waiting for the parts to dry, then installing electronics and then doing some detail work, then finally installing some software. And it's still not perfect, but it looks a lot better than when it came out of the 3D printer. So there's definitely a little bit of work involved, but now I have 2 functioning PC engines, so to me, it's worth it. Now it's time to fire up the consoles, and we'll start with the PC Engine Classic Edition, and we'll load up Soldier Blade. And with this miniature console, I have a custom attract mode image, and it's programmed to load a preview of whatever game is loaded. So let's hit the power button here and test it out. And the image is starting to boot now. Now let's go to full screen so you can see everything here. And I also compiled a custom PC Engine intro for the splash screen. It's nothing elaborate, it's just a nice simple intro. And eventually I will get rid of that boot up script, but I wanted to show you that it is in fact running Retropie. And there it is, there's a preview of Soldier Blade, so I can select this game to play or pick other games on the list. And for this image, I have a mixture of TurboGrafx-16 games and PC Engine games. And like I said earlier, the PC Engine was a very successful system in Japan. The fact that in 1987 it outsold the Famicom is huge. And the PC Engine has a lot of great titles that are worth checking out. A lot of them were only released in Japan, and we never saw them here in the US for the TurboGrafx-16. So let's go ahead and test out a game, and we might as well test out Soldier Blade since that's the game we have loaded. And there's still so many games I haven't even tried for the PC Engine, and Soldier Blade is actually one of those games. And I'm not disappointed, this is actually a pretty solid game. This is a vertical shooter, and it moves pretty fast, even when there's a lot of objects on the screen at the same time. And I'd also like to add the emulation for this game using a Raspberry Pi Zero with Retropie installed is pretty good. I'm not noticing any lag, so as far as I can tell, this game is playing just like it should be. So if you're into vertical shooters, this is definitely a game you should check out. Okay, it's time to go ahead and test that power button and the shutdown script. So we'll go ahead and exit and go back to the main menu. Now I'm going to go ahead and push that power button, and when I do that, it should start the shutdown script and safely shut down Retropie and my Raspberry Pi Zero. And it's working. Now let's go ahead and test out my full-size console. This is a Hue card that has an NFC tag on the back side of it. This is Splatterhouse, let's go ahead and load this in there. And when I power up the console, it should automatically load that game. And this has that same boot up intro for the splash screen, but the Pi image is quite a bit different. And also I'd like to mention that there's a little lightning bolt that keeps popping up in that right corner. And that's because I have too many things plugged in at once here for testing purposes. Normally I'd be using just one outlet for my power source, so that lightning bolt would not be there. So now the game that I have loaded should boot right up. And there it goes, there's Splatterhouse. And this is an okay game, but I guess maybe after about half an hour it gets pretty repetitive, and I kind of get over it. But there is a lot of people out there that actually like this game and give us some good reviews. As far as the way it looks great, and it's graphically impressive. And it does live up to the name Splatterhouse because you're just constantly splattering everyone's face. Alright, now I'm going to go ahead and hit that power button, and that's going to initiate the soft shutdown script. And when you're using a safe shutdown script, it does take a little bit longer to shut everything down, maybe about 10 to 15 seconds, but it's a lot safer for that Pi image. So it's just about done shutting down, and now we're going to load up another game. Here is Street Fighter 2 Championship Edition. So let's go ahead and load this game into the console. And just like the other game, this game should boot right up. So I'm going to go ahead and fast forward this so we don't have to watch the boot up and the intro again. And here is Street Fighter 2 Championship Edition. And I talked about this in one of my other videos, but when I was growing up as a kid, I was more of a Mortal Kombat kid. But towards the end of the 90s, I started to gravitate towards Street Fighter and became a huge Street Fighter fan myself. Both Mortal Kombat and Street Fighter started to convert to 3D games, and I kept playing those games too, but there's just something about the 2D games that's just an overall better experience for me. So I guess I'm just stuck in the retro gaming scene. But I guess there's worse places I could be. And it looks like I just got my ass kicked. So let's go ahead and boot up the main menu and I'll show you that. This is a custom emulation theme. This is a theme that was originally made by Wreckage for the Super Nintendo, and I modified it and changed the artwork to the PC Engine artwork on the top and the bottom. So it gives it a nice clean look, and it kind of imitates the Super Nintendo Classic Edition menu. And I have pretty close to the full collection of the PC Engine games, including all the artwork. And some of that artwork is scraped from the TurboGrafx-16, but the game itself is a PC Engine game. So let's go ahead and test out a game. We'll test out City Hunter, and this is definitely a game I've never tried before. And some of the game has English, some of it's Japanese, so there's a lot of the game I can't read. But for the most part, I can play the game just fine. And this ended up being a pretty cool game, but after playing for a while, I got stuck because I couldn't read none of the menus and I couldn't figure out what my goal is supposed to be. So I guess I'm gonna have to learn some Japanese. Maybe this lady can tell me what to do, if I don't accidentally shoot her. Oh, that's what I'm supposed to do. Right. Let's try another game out. Let's try Fighting Run. It sounds cool. And it looks like there's some robots. I like robots. And this game definitely lives up to its name. You fight while you're running to the finish line. It's a decent game with some good music too. It is kind of weird though that it allows you to go out of the screen at the top. It's a pretty creative game and I think it looks pretty good, especially if you compare this to the original Famicom games. The speed on a lot of the PC Engine games really impresses me. Okay, time for the next game. Let's try Ninja Warriors. I used to think ninjas were the toughest, coolest, and baddest people on the planet. But then I watched the first UFC and I watched this ninja master get completely destroyed. I was crushed and I realized maybe I shouldn't be a ninja. So I really enjoy building these retro consoles and I do this for a hobby. And I've already got a couple other projects in the works. Alright everyone, thanks for watching. If you liked that video, please click that like button. If you want to hear more from me, please subscribe. And if you want to help support the channel, you can now follow me on Facebook and Patreon. Have a great day, and I'll see you next time.